The Last Keeper, When the Light Fights Back. The lighthouse stood alone, perched on the edge of the world where the land crumbled into the sea. Its stones, once brilliant and white, had turned to shades of gray, worn smooth by the relentless caress of time and tide. Above it, the sky was an unbroken expanse of ash, neither day nor night, a permanent twilight that stretched endlessly in all directions. The air carried a strange weight, not of storms, but of silence. A silence so deep it felt alive, pressing against the ears and heart of anyone who dared linger. The sea below was not water but something darker. It shifted and churned, a liquid void, its surface reflecting nothing but the faint glimmers of the lighthouse's fading light. To gaze too long into its depths was to feel your mind unravel, as if the sea drank thoughts and dreams, leaving behind only an aching emptiness. This was no ordinary lighthouse, nor an ordinary world. It did not guide ships. There were no ships left to guide. Instead, its beam pierced the endless twilight, sweeping across the horizon like a solitary breath in a suffocating expanse. The light did not warn of rocks or shoals. It held back the darkness. For in this place, beyond the borders of forgotten civilizations, shadows were no longer cast by objects. They were alive. The shadows were not mere absences of light. They moved with a purpose, creeping across the land in silent waves, devouring everything they touched. Forests became husks, rivers turned to dust, and even the stars had been swallowed, one by one, until only the lighthouse remained. Its light was a fragile thread, stretched impossibly thin, keeping the shadows at bay. Inside the lighthouse, a keeper remained. No one knew their name or origin, not even the keeper themselves. Memories here were fleeting, unraveling like loose threads in the presence of the void. The keeper's world was confined to the winding stairs of the lighthouse, the humming machinery of its heart, and the oil that fed the flame. The oil was no ordinary fuel. It was distilled from the keeper's very essence. Every day they poured a drop of their soul into the lantern's reservoir, and every day the light grew dimmer. The keeper could feel it, the slow erosion of self, the thinning of their connection to whatever life they had once known. And yet, they did not stop. The alternative was unthinkable. There were legends whispered by the winds that scraped against the lighthouse's stones, tales of a time before the shadows had risen, a time when the world was full of color and sound, of laughter and sorrow, of lives lived and lost. But to the keeper, these stories were like the fading echoes of a dream they could no longer remember. All that mattered was the light. But tonight, something was different. The flame wavered, its steady rhythm broken by an unseen disturbance. The air grew colder, heavier, and the walls of the lighthouse seemed to groan, as though under the weight of something immense. The keeper ascended the spiral staircase, each step feeling harder than the last, their hands trembling as they reached for the lantern. At the top, the light flickered, its beam faltering as if caught in an unseen hand. Beyond the glass, the shadows surge, pressing against the lighthouse like a tide breaking against a dam. The keeper's chest tightened, a deep and primal fear clawing its way to the surface. And then they saw it, a figure standing in the void. It was neither shadow nor light, but something in between, a silhouette that shimmered like heat waves over scorched earth. It did not move, yet its presence pressed into the keeper's mind, filling it with questions that had no words, only feelings, despair, curiosity, and an aching sense of recognition. The keeper felt the oil within them stir, a pulsing warmth deep in their core. They understood instinctively that this figure was not here to destroy the light, but to challenge it, to demand something of the keeper they did not yet comprehend. The flame in the lantern sputtered, and for the first time, the keeper felt its hunger. It needed more. The figure raised a hand, pointing toward the horizon where the shadows seethed and boiled. There, in the distance, a faint glimmer appeared. A second light, so small it could have been a trick of the mind. But it was real, and it was moving, as though calling out to the lighthouse's beam. The keeper's heart raced. A choice lay before them, to stay and keep the fragile balance, pouring their soul drop by drop into the lantern until nothing remained, or to extinguish the light and venture into the shadows in search of the distant glow. For the first time, the keeper hesitated. The shadows outside pressed harder, whispering promises of oblivion, while the light within them pulsed with a question they could not ignore. Would they dare leave the safety of the lighthouse to seek the unknown? Or would they remain a prisoner to the flame until the light finally burned out and the world succumbed to darkness? The keepers stood at the edge of decision, the weight of eternity in their trembling hands. The keeper's breath caught as they gripped the edge of the lantern housing, their trembling fingers brushing against the warm glass. The distant glow beyond the shadows flickered, faint and tantalizing. It pulsed like a heartbeat, a rhythm that seemed to resonate deep within the keeper's own chest. It was a call, a whisper from something they could not name, yet it felt intimately familiar. The light in the lantern wavered again, its flame shrinking as if sensing the keeper's indecision. The shadows outside surged in response, their movements growing bolder. They curled around the base of the lighthouse, coiling upward like smoke, testing its walls with tendrils of consuming darkness. The air grew heavy with the weight of their presence, and the keeper felt the pull of the void, beckoning them to surrender. But the glimmer on the horizon didn't waver. It remained steadfast, piercing the ocean of shadows like a lone star in an empty sky. The keeper turned away from the lantern and descended the spiral staircase, their footsteps hesitant but determined. They reached the base of the lighthouse where the door stood, ancient and weathered, a barrier between light and shadow. The brass handle was cold under their palm, and for a moment they hesitated. The keeper had never opened this door, had never stepped beyond the threshold into the world outside. They were the keeper, after all. Their place was within the lighthouse, tending the flame, guarding the light. To leave was to abandon their purpose, to risk plunging the world into darkness. And yet, the glow beyond the shadows called to them. With a deep breath, the keeper pushed the door open. It creaked on its hinges, and a wave of cold air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of the void. Bitter and metallic, tinged with an undercurrent of something ancient and unyielding. The shadows recoiled at the sudden intrusion of light, writhing and retreating, but only slightly. They hovered at the edge of the doorway, waiting. The keeper stepped forward, the ground beneath their feet soft and shifting, like walking on the surface of a dream. The light of the lantern spilled out behind them, casting long, flickering shadows that danced across the undulating landscape of the void. The distant glimmer grew brighter as they moved toward it, a beacon guiding their uncertain path. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the void itself sought to drag them down. The shadows whispered in voices too faint to understand, their words weaving into the keeper's thoughts, planting seeds of doubt. "You will fail," they seemed to say. "The light will die. You are nothing without the flame." But the keeper pressed on, their eyes fixed on the glimmer ahead. It grew larger now, resolving into a shape. A second lighthouse, though smaller and more fragile than the one they had left behind. Its light was faint but steady, a golden thread in the tapestry of darkness. The keeper's pulse quickened. If another lighthouse existed, then perhaps they were not alone in this endless twilight. Perhaps there was something, someone, waiting for them beyond the shadows. The air grew colder as they approached, the whispers of the shadows rising to a cacophony of doubt and despair. The second lighthouse flickered, its beam faltering as though it too sensed the keeper's presence. They reached the base of the tower, its stones worn and cracked, and placed a hand against the cool surface. The door to the second lighthouse opened without resistance, revealing an interior that mirrored their own. A winding staircase, a humming lantern, a faintly glowing flame. But there was no keeper here. The space felt empty, abandoned, as though its guardian had long since vanished. The keeper climbed the staircase, their steps echoing in the hollow silence. At the top, they found the lantern, its light dim but still burning. They reached out, hesitant, and touched the glass. The flame flared briefly, then settled, its glow warming their hand. It was then that they saw it, a single drop of oil, glistening at the base of the lantern. The keeper understood. This flame had been fed by another, just as their own lantern had consumed pieces of their soul. But its keeper was gone, their essence spent. A choice lay before them. They could remain here, take the place of the missing keeper and tend this fragile flame. Or they could return to their own lighthouse, where their light still burned, and hoped that the faint connection between the two would be enough to hold back the shadows. But a third option lingered, unspoken yet undeniable. The keeper could take the drop of oil, merge it with their own, and carry both flames forward into the unknown. It was a risk, a gamble against the void, but it was also a chance to ignite something greater than either flame alone. The shadows pressed closer, their whispers deafening. The keeper stood at the edge of decision, their hands trembling, the weight of two worlds in their grasp. And then, with a steady breath, they reached for the drop of oil. The keeper's fingers hovered above the drop of oil, its surface glistening with a golden warmth that defied the cold void around them. As they touched it, the oil shivered, responding to their presence. It felt alive, an echo of the keeper who had once guarded this flame. The drop clung to their fingertips, a fragile spark of light, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. The keeper closed their eyes and pressed the drop against their chest. A surge of warmth spread through their body, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Memories not their own flooded their mind. Scenes of another life, another keeper, who had stood against the shadows just as they had. They saw the rise and fall of a distant lighthouse, the exhaustion of its guardian, and their final sacrifice to keep the light alive. But they also felt hope. The other keeper had not failed. They had given the flame a chance to endure, to find a new guardian. That responsibility now lay with the keeper. The drop of oil merged with their essence, and the flame within them flared brighter than ever before. It was no longer a single light, but a confluence of two lives, two sacrifices, bound together in defiance of the encroaching darkness. The shadows outside recoiled, their whispers turning to hisses of anger and fear. The keeper descended the staircase, the second lighthouse trembling as if it, too, felt the weight of what was to come. They stepped outside, the void rippling under their feet, and turned to face their own lighthouse in the distance. Its light flickered weakly, barely holding against the surge of shadows. The path back was treacherous. The shadows, sensing the keeper's newfound strength, grew bolder. They lashed out, their tendrils clawing at the keeper's feet, pulling at their resolve. But the keeper moved forward, each step burning with purpose. The glow within them radiated outward, creating a halo of light that held the darkness at bay. As they approached their lighthouse, its flame flared weakly, as though it recognized them. The shadows swirled around its base, a desperate, seething mass, but they could not cross the keeper's light. They reached the lantern at the top, their body trembling from the journey, and opened the reservoir. The oil within them flowed freely, merging with the lantern's reservoir. The flames surged to life. The beam of the lighthouse expanded, cutting through the void like a sword of light. The shadows screeched and retreated, their forms unraveling in the brilliance. The void itself seemed to tremble, its oppressive weight lifting as the light swept across the horizon. The second lighthouse responded, its beam glowing brighter in unison, and for the first time the two lights connected, threads of golden energy weaving a bridge through the darkness. The keeper felt their strength waning, their essence pouring into the flame. But this time they did not fear. The drop of oil they had taken had changed them, strengthened them. They were no longer alone. They could feel the connection between the lighthouses, the shared burden of holding the shadows at bay. The light was no longer a solitary struggle. It was a bond, a network of defiance against the void. And then, on the horizon, more glimmers appeared. Tiny sparks at first, then growing brighter, revealing other lighthouses, others who had been fighting their own battles in the dark. The keeper's heart swelled with hope as the beams of light began to connect, a web of radiance stretching across the endless twilight. The shadows faltered, their whispers fading into silence. The void, once insurmountable, now seemed small and distant, its power diminished by the unity of the lights. The keeper stood at the top of their lighthouse, the lantern's flame burning brighter than ever. They were tired, their essence diminished, but they felt no fear. The light would endure, not because of one keeper, but because of all of them, scattered across the twilight, their flames united against the dark. And as the first glimmers of dawn broke on the horizon, a dawn not seen for countless ages, the keeper smiled. The world at last was beginning to heal. The light would no longer be a solitary beacon, but a chorus, a defiant harmony against the shadows. The keeper closed their eyes, their body growing still, and became one with the flame. But the light did not fade. It burned on, stronger than ever, a testament to their sacrifice and the enduring hope they had sparked in a world reborn.